She stood in the doorway with papers in her hand and urgency in her voice. "Mom, just sign it. It's nothing serious, just some updates for the house." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes flicked sideways, not quite meeting mine. I was sitting in the armchair, my glasses in my lap, the late afternoon sun turning the kitchen gold behind her. Something in me, a quiet, ancient instinct, tightened. "Updates?" I asked slowly. She smiled wider. "Just routine stuff. You know how the lawyer said everything needed to be streamlined? This helps with that." But her hands were trembling. I took the papers, letting my fingers feel their weight. Legal pages always feel heavier than they look. I scanned the first line. It mentioned transfer of ownership. My heart fluttered. "Let me read it," I said. She stiffened. "You don't need to. It's standard. Just sign where I've highlighted." I looked at her then, not as my daughter, but as someone I no longer fully recognized. The silence between us thickened. My pen stayed capped. She pushed the papers closer. I pushed them back. That was the moment, the very moment, where the ground beneath our relationship began to crack. I didn't sign. Not that day. Not without reading. And I didn't know then, but that hesitation, that tiny pause, would save everything I'd built. Because what was hidden in that fine print wasn't just a legal trick. It was betrayal, dressed up in trust. If you've ever been told, "Trust me," when your gut said otherwise, "Stay with me," you deserve to hear what happened next. I remember the first time I held her, red-faced and wailing. 5 pounds and 11 ounces of her wrapped in a hospital blanket too big for her tiny limbs. My body was exhausted from labor, but my heart had never felt more alive. From that moment on, I wasn't just someone's daughter or someone's wife. I became someone's mother. Her mother. Life didn't give us much. Her father left when she was 2. No long note, no drawn-out goodbye. Just a slammed door and a pile of unpaid bills. But I told her too, when she was old enough to ask, that we were enough. Her and me. A team. I worked nights at the diner and mornings at the elementary school cafeteria. My hands always smelled of dish soap or fryer grease. My feet always ached. But every shift, every dollar, every callous eye did it gladly. Because she needed school shoes that fit. She needed lunch money. She needed new pencils, pink erasers, and glitter glue for her 3rd grade projects. She needed her mother to be steady even when the world was not. Our home was small, but I made it warm. Hand-sewn curtains in the kitchen. Birthday cakes from scratch. A porch swing I bought secondhand, just so we could sit and watch the rain together. I still remember how she'd curl beside me during thunderstorms, her cheek pressed to my side, whispering, "You make me feel safe, Mommy." And that was my entire world, her safety. Her smile. Her future when she turned 14 and started staying late at school for theater. I picked up another job on weekends to help pay for her costumes and field trips. She never knew. I didn't want her to carry the weight of my exhaustion. She just saw her dresses appear on time. She got to go to every camp, every competition. I made sure of it. College was another mountain. She dreamed of becoming a lawyer. I remember the way her eyes lit up when the acceptance letter came from the university. We danced in the kitchen like fools, barefoot and beaming. I sold my wedding ring to pay her first tuition deposit. I didn't cry about it. I felt proud. I wrote her weekly. Sent care packages. When she missed home, I'd stay on the phone until she fell asleep. I filled that empty dorm room with my voice, with love that stretched across state lines. During her 2nd year, I took out a personal loan, unsecured and steep, just to help her afford a study abroad program in London. She came back with new stories, new clothes, and an accent in her R's. She was blooming, and I never once wanted to clip her wings. And when she graduated, I sat in the front row, clutching flowers and a wrinkled handkerchief. The proudest mother on earth. Her name echoed across the auditorium, and I stood before anyone else. That applause, it was for her, but it felt like it reached through me too. I was her safe place, even after she moved out. I kept the house just how she liked it. Her room stayed untouched. Lavender sheets, trophies, books she left behind. I never called it my house. It was always our home. She'd come on weekends, sometimes, bring laundry, share news. Sometimes she'd bring her boyfriend later, her fiancé. I welcomed him like a son. I made him sweet tea. I offered him the porch swing, but slowly, almost too slowly to notice, things changed. The calls became shorter. Visits less frequent. She said she was busy, that she was building a life, and I understood. Of course I understood. That's what I raised her to do still. I clung to the memory of the little girl who once hid behind my legs when strangers said hello, who used to draw crayon pictures of me with angel wings, who cried at the thought of spending even a night at Grandma's because she didn't want to leave Mommy. But now, the girl who once whispered, "You make me feel safe," was talking about assets, about documents, about needing me to make things easier legally, about trust decks this time. It didn't feel like the kind we built with bedtime stories and broken piggy banks. It felt clinical, sharp, rushed. When she slid those papers across the table, it wasn't the same hand that once held mine across parking lots. It was a stranger's hand, cold, unfamiliar, and yet, even as my heart twisted with confusion, a part of me still wanted to protect her, still wanted to believe she was the same child. I once rocked to sleep under a leaky roof with a lullaby and a prayer. That's the thing about being a mother. You carry their pain, even when they're the ones inflicting it. You believe in their goodness, Evan, when they test it. You love, especially when it hurts. But when I looked into her eyes that day, I couldn't find the girl I raised. I found ambition. I found urgency. I found something I couldn't quite name, but it wasn't warmth. And all those years, those sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the quiet pride began to flicker under the weight of her silence. That's when I realized, sometimes, the deepest betrayal doesn't start with cruelty. It starts with distance, with a softened voice, with a signature line she doesn't want you to read. I was her safe place. But maybe I had forgotten to keep myself safe too. The change didn't happen all at once. That's the part that hurts the most. It wasn't a single argument or one cruel word that built a wall between us. It was quieter than that, slower, like watching sunlight fade through a dirty window, you know? Something beautiful is being hidden, but you can't quite clean it fast enough. It started just after the wedding. At first, I told myself it was normal. She had a new husband, a new routine, a new life to settle into. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who clung too tightly, so I gave space. I waited for calls. I didn't complain when visits became short or skipped altogether. I figured she was busy learning how to be a wife. But soon, that space became distance. And that distance grew roots. Phone calls became appointments scheduled, short and surface level. She stopped asking about my day. I'd hear her voice in bursts, rushed and clipped. Can't talk long. We're running out the door. I'll call back later. The callbacks didn't come when they did visit. It felt staged, like she was playing a role, holding her husband's hand like a prop, smiling too much, laughing too loudly, complimenting my house as if she'd never lived in it. Like she was seeing a stranger's home. Her husband, was always there, always hovering. He called me ma'am with that cold politeness that feels like a boundary, not a courtesy. If I spoke too long, he'd interrupt. If I tried to share a story, he'd glance at his phone. Once I offered him pie, and he said, "We're watching our carbs," with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I began to feel like a guest in my own life. She started talking differently, too, using words I didn't recognize, tones that made my name feel heavy. "Mom, you're just being emotional. You don't understand how these things work anymore. It's different. Now we're building something." As if I had built nothing. As if the life I scraped together with blood, sweat, and secondhand furniture was less than their granite countertops and shared Google calendars. I kept making excuses. Told myself she was overwhelmed. That maybe she was under pressure. That maybe her husband had a temper or expectations, or a way of controlling the thermostat in her life, until the warmth toward me ran cold. I tried harder. I invited them for dinners. scent cards, crocheted a baby blanket before I even knew if they were planning for children. I was still holding on to the girl who once made me macaroni necklaces for Mother's Day, but the worst kind of grief is watching someone fade from love into convenience. Then came the red flag I can never forget. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. She came over without Kalenga, rare thing by then. She brought coffee and sat at the kitchen table like she used to, except her eyes didn't rest. They flicked from window to counter to her phone, to the unopened bills stacked by the fridge. Then she reached into her bag and slid a folder across the table. Just something to help us with some temporary financial restructuring, she said. Her voice was too bright. Her smile too stiff. Just moving some things around. Nothing major. I opened the folder. Legal documents. Words I didn't fully understand at first glance. But I saw one sentence in bold near the top. Temporary property transfer agreement. The house. My house. She wanted me to transfer it into their name. Temporarily, she said. It'll help us get approved for a loan, she explained. It's just paperwork, Mom. We'll transfer it back. It's all clean and legal. I looked at her, really looked. This wasn't the child I'd raised to love Sunday pancakes and cry at sad movies. This was someone else, someone taught to frame love as leverage. I asked why this house. Because it's paid off, she said without hesitation. It's an asset. Asset. Not home. Not memories. Not the kitchen where she took her first steps or the garden we planted in spring. Just an asset. I felt the air shift in the room, like something holy had been cracked in half. She leaned in, gentle but firm. Mom, just sign it. I didn't. Not that day. I told her I'd think about it. She smiled, kissed my cheek and said, it's just business. Trust me. But that night I sat in my living room with a folder on my lap, heart pounding louder than the rain on the windows. It wasn't business, it was betrayal in disguise. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could trust the child I'd once protected from every shadow. It was nothing at first. A misplaced step, a bit of water on the kitchen floor, and a moment of distraction. I was reaching for the kettle, thinking about whether I had enough milk for tea, when my foot slipped sideways. The sound my ankle made like a twig snapping in a winter forest still echoes in my memory. Pain flared, fast and sharp. And before I knew it, I was on the floor, staring up at the cabinets. The room felt too big suddenly. The walls too far. I dragged myself to the chair and used every ounce of strength to pull myself up. I didn't cry. Not then. I told myself it was just a sprain. Just a stumble. Something a hot compress and some rest would fix. But by the time I got to the clinic, a shin. My ankle had swollen to the size of a grapefruit. The doctor tilted his head sympathetically and said, hairline fracture? No surgery needed, but you'll need to stay off it. Maybe even a wheelchair for a while. A wheelchair. I nodded politely, but inside I bristled. I wasn't that old. I wasn't fragile. I just slipped. When I told my daughter over the phone, her response was immediate. But it wasn't concern. Not really. It was something else. Double quotes. Oh, Mom, she sighed like I'd disappointed her. You've got to be more careful. The next morning, they were at my door, her and her husband, armed with clipboards and tote bags and voices thick with pity. We brought you some things, she said, setting down a box. It had a pill organizer, some frozen meals, and brochures. Real brochures. One was titled Living Safely with Limited Mobility. I stared at it. I'll be fine in a few weeks, I said. It's not permanent. Her husband gave me that look, again the one he wore when I tried to explain how online banking confuses me. A mix of patience and superiority. It's better to be prepared, he said, as if I'd asked for advice. Over the next few days, the tone changed further. I wasn't just injured, I was at risk. She started using phrases like, let's just keep it simple and you don't need to worry about all that right now. It was subtle. But the shift was undeniable. My daughter, the one I'd stayed up nights for, the one I nursed through every childhood fever, was now speaking to me like I was the child. Mom, I think you should let us take over your finances for a little while. Just until you're back on your feet. I blinked. I can pay my own bills. Of course you can, she said, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. We just want to help. It's temporary. Everything was temporary lately. The fall, the chair, the paperwork they kept hinting at. Her husband chimed in next. We were reading about guardianship laws just for emergencies. It's not about taking control. It's about protecting you in case something else happens. I felt my breath catch. Guardianship, that wasn't about help. That was about power. I don't need a guardian, I said firmly. I need an ice pack in a few weeks. They didn't argue. Not directly. But they started treating me differently. They moved things in the house without asking. Took the keys to my car just for safekeeping. Brought over a tablet preloaded with financial apps. Saying, "We've set everything up. Just tap when you need something paid. Tap, sign, obey." I wasn't being helped. I was being managed. The worst part? They did it kindly, smiling, using soft voices. Wrapping control in the language of love. But I could feel it. The leash tightening once. I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "She's not thinking clearly," her husband said. "She's tired." My daughter replied. And scared. She just won't admit it. No one asked what I felt. That night, I wheeled myself to the mirror. Looked into my own eyes. I was still me. A woman who had raised a daughter on less than a living wage. A woman who hadn't asked for much, only respect, but in their eyes now, I wasn't capable. I was breakable, vulnerable. Weak, and weakness, I was starting to realize, was the crack they'd been waiting for. Not to help to take over. It was a Thursday afternoon when she brought the envelope. The sun filtered through the living room curtains, casting soft golden light across the floor. I was in my chair reading the same paragraph in my book for the third time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because my thoughts kept drifting. My ankle was healing, but not fast enough for my liking. The air still smelled like antiseptic and silence. She arrived without calling, which was rare. Her smile was tight. "Hey, Mom," she said, setting her purse on the table. "I've got something for you." The envelope was cream-colored, thick, unassuming, just some paperwork. She added casually, "Walking into the kitchen like this was normal, I turned the envelope over in my hands. My name was on the front in printed block letters. Not her handwriting. Something official. What kind of paperwork?" I asked. She returned with a glass of water and sat across from me. "Just updates. Legal stuff. You know, making sure things are in place in case anything happens." Her tone was light. But her foot tapped against the floor. Her fingers drummed on the armrest. "In case what happens?" I asked, my voice even. She waved it off. "You're doing great, Mom. I just mean life's unpredictable." "And after the fall, well?" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were multiple documents. Stacks of them. Legalese in tiny print. Some of it looked familiar: power of attorney, medical directives. But there were new terms too. Terms I hadn't seen before. One line stood out. Irrevocable transfer of property rights. My heart paused. "I'd like to read through these," I said. My voice steady. Her face changed. Just slightly. "But I saw it. They're standard," she said too quickly. "We had a lawyer draft them up. It's nothing scary." I asked Jot. She hesitated. "Well, Daniel helped. He's good with this stuff." Of course he did. I picked up the first page, eyes scanning slowly. My reading glasses were on the side table. I reached for them. She sighed audibly. "Mom, seriously? It's like 20 pages. It's just the formal version of what we talked about. We didn't talk about this." "Yes." "We did," she insisted, suddenly sharper. "When you said you wanted us to be involved if anything ever happened. Remember?" I didn't remember, or maybe I remembered differently. I adjusted the glasses. "I still want to read it." Silence, thick, cold. "You don't trust me?" she asked. Her voice dropped, almost trembling. "It's not about that," I said gently. "It's about understanding what I'm signing." She stood abruptly. "You think I'd trick you?" No, I replied, though I wasn't sure anymore. I think it's a lot of paper and I need time. Her face twisted hurt offense, something darker behind her eyes. I spent hours getting this ready. We've rearranged so much for you. Do you know how exhausting it's been? All the back and forth, making sure the bank is updated. Getting the notary on standby, making sure you're protected. Protected from what? I interrupted. She didn't answer. She just crossed her arms and stared down at me. You always do this, she said finally. You make things difficult. You act like everything is a trap. It's insulting. I looked at the pages again. The words blurred slightly, but one sentence stood out in bold. Once signed, the grantor relinquishes all legal authority over the property listed in Schedule A. I flipped to the back. Schedule A included my house, my bank accounts, even my car, all of it. This isn't what we discussed, I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was shaking. She threw her hands in the air. Fine, don't sign it. Let's just wait until something terrible happens and then scramble like always. Manipulation. Wrapped in concern. Delivered in a daughter's voice. I closed the envelope. I'm not saying I won't sign anything. I'm saying I'll do it after I've read every word. She stared at me for a long moment. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she whispered. I didn't flinch. Maybe, I said. But I've signed too many things in my life with my eyes closed. Not anymore. She exhaled, long and angry, and grabbed her purse. Whatever. Do what you want. Just don't come crying when something goes wrong. And then she left. I sat alone in the silence that followed, the envelope still in my lap. My fingers trembled slightly as I slid the papers back inside. If I had signed, I would have signed away the only thing I had left, my name, the right to make decisions, the dignity of ownership, the last thread of independence I still held. I looked out the window, at the fading light beyond the trees, and I whispered aloud to no one but myself, not today, not ever. The next morning, I didn't open the envelope. I just stared at it sitting there on the kitchen table like it had a pulse, like it was breathing quietly, waiting for me to surrender. But something inside me said, not yet. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, tucked the envelope under my arm, and wheeled myself next door to Evelyn's. Evelyn was more than just a neighbor. She'd lived 3 doors down since I moved in 20 years ago. Her husband passed 5 years before mine. And since then, we'd shared holidays, morning coffees, and quiet porch talks that didn't need to be filled with words. She also worked part-time at a law office downtown, mostly filing and managing appointments, but over the years, she'd picked up more than most assistants ever would. And she had something else I needed. Clarity without judgment. I knocked softly, hoping she'd be home. A moment later, she opened the door in her robe and slippers. Well, look who the wind carried in. She smiled. You want coffee or truth first? I held up the envelope. She nodded slowly. Truth, then? We sat at her kitchen table, the kettle humming behind her. She pulled out her reading glasses and laid the papers out like a deck of cards. This might take a bit, she said. You want to tell me what I'm looking for? I want to know what I almost signed. I said, so we read dot at first. She was quiet, only pausing to squint or underline a phrase with her fingertip. But around page 5, her lips pursed. By page 9, she exhaled hard. Do you see this clause here? She said, tapping the page. This gives them full financial control immediately, not in case of an emergency. Not upon your request. Immediate power of attorney. I stared till she flipped to another page. And here this line signs over full medical authority to your daughter and her husband. No cosign. No oversight. My throat tightened. What does that mean exactly? It means, she said gently, they could move you into a facility tomorrow. They could deny treatments, change your providers. You wouldn't have a say. My hands clenched. Keep going, I whispered. She turned to the last section. And this is the worst. This property transition agreement. That's not temporary, hon. That's a transfer of deed. Once you sign this, the house is legally theirs. But she said, my voice cracked. I know what she said, Evelyn replied. But this is what she meant. I didn't cry. Not right away. I sat there, hands trembling, staring at the paper like it might morph into something else. Something kinder. But it DD ends in quotes. It was black ink on white pages, signed and notarized. Ready for my signature. Ready to erase me? She had prepared everything. All I had to do was fall in line. Evelyn reached over and touched my hand. You didn't sign. That's what matters. I nodded slowly, but the weight in my chest felt like stone. She was trying to erase me while I was still alive. Those words fell out before I even realized I'd said them, but they were true. And saying them out loud shattered something I didn't know I was still holding. We sat in silence for a while. The kettle whistled and she poured the tea. Her hands steady where mine had begun to shake. She had it all set up, I whispered, like a checklist. People like Daniel, Evelyn said, they don't just want control. They want silence. And people like your daughter. Sometimes they confuse obedience with love. She thought if she could just make it easy, you wouldn't fight it. But I'm not ready to disappear. Evelyn looked at me really. Looked. Then don't. I took the papers, carefully slid them back into the envelope, and pressed the flap closed without sealing it. Later that evening, I placed the envelope in the fireplace and watched the edges curl into flame. There was no ceremony, no grand gesture, just quiet clarity and the smell of burning lies. I didn't call first. I didn't text. I simply showed up. The air outside their house smelled of blooming magnolias and just cut grass. It should have felt familiar. It used to feel like family. Now it felt like a mask, a carefully curated illusion meant to hide something rotten underneath. Tanya answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mom, what a surprise. Come in, come in. Her voice had sugar but no warmth. I wheeled myself inside. A smooth tile floor under my wheels offering little resistance. It felt like walking into someone else's life. Emily was in the kitchen stirring a pot. She looked up, startled. Mom. I met her eyes and held them. We need to talk. She stiffened. Now? Yes. Tanya quietly stepped away, tension simmering in the air. I pulled out the envelope, not the one from the fireplace. That was ashes. This was a fresh one. Empty. Just a symbol now. I had someone look over the papers. Emily's face didn't change. Not at first. She was always good at that, keeping the mask on. What papers? I raised an eyebrow. The ones you asked me to sign. The ones that would have given you control over everything I own. My house, my medical rights. My life, a beat past. Then she scoffed. Oh, those? Yes, those. She put the spoon down. I was trying to make things easier, Mom. You've been struggling. I thought it was time we took some responsibilities off your plate. By taking the whole kitchen. I said evenly, her jaw tensed. You're being dramatic. No, Emily. Dramatic would be me pretending this was anything other than what it was. Control. Disguised as concern, she crossed her arms. Why don't you trust me? That was the moment, not the paperwork, not the lies. That sentence, because it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. You raised me to be responsible, she continued, to plan ahead. That's all I was doing. You didn't raise me. I corrected her, softly but firmly. I raised you. She blinked, and I raised you to be honest. To ask, not assume. To help, not hijack. I'm not hijacking anything. She snapped. You're the one turning this into a circus. I just wanted to make sure you'd be okay. You wanted to make sure you'd be in charge, I said. That's not the same thing. Just then, Daniel walked in, wiping his hands with a dish towel. Everything all right? Emily opened her mouth, but I beat her to it. Perfect timing. Why don't you join us? He looked between us, his lips tightening. What's going on? Your wife brought me documents to sign, I said. Documents that would have handed over my home and every decision about my life to the two of you. And she did it without explaining a single line. Daniel stayed quiet for a moment, then chuckled. It's not as sinister as you're making it sound. I read every word, I replied. It's exactly as sinister. He stepped closer, his smile tight. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I almost made one. But I didn't. Emily's voice was quieter now. We were just trying to help. Help, I repeated, as if tasting the word. Real help doesn't require secrecy. It doesn't come with pressure. It doesn't smell like manipulation. Daniel folded his arms. You're blowing this out of proportion, and you're not going to gaslight me in my own life. I said. The room fell silent. They weren't used to this version of me, the one who didn't flinch, who didn't fold, who didn't apologize for asking questions. Emily reached out just slightly. Mom, please. Can we just no? I said. We can't. Because this wasn't a misstep. It was a plan. And the scariest part? You weren't even going to tell me what I was signing. You looked me in the eye and lied. Daniel shook his head, clearly done with the performance. This is exactly why we needed those documents. You're unstable. My stomach turned. I turned to Emily, and you let him speak for both of you. Just like that. She looked away. I wheeled back slowly. I came here today hoping I was wrong, hoping there was a misunderstanding. But you've confirmed everything I feared. Where are you going? Emily asked. Home, I said. While I still have one. She stepped forward. Mom, wait. I stopped in the doorway. No, you wait. I looked at her, really looked. At the girl I had once cradled through fevers and heartbreaks. At the woman I had fought for. At the stranger now standing in her place. I'm not walking out because I'm weak. I'm walking out because I finally see things clearly. I walked in your shadow for too long. Today I chose light. I opened the door. Neither of them followed as I rolled out into the sun. A strange calm settled in my chest. I hadn't won. I hadn't lost, but I was finally awake. The law office was quiet. Cool air hummed gently through the vents. And the scent of old wood and legal paper lingered like memory itself. I sat across from Mr. Dorsey, a man whose eyes had the calm weight of someone who'd seen. Families fall apart over ink and inheritance. Take your time, he said, sliding a fresh draft toward me. But I didn't need time anymore. I had already wasted enough of it, this moment, sitting here. Document in front of me, pen steady in my hand. Wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger either. It was about reclaiming something I didn't even realize I had lost. My voice. For so long I had let others narrate my life. I gave without contracts, trusted without safeguards, loved without conditions. And where did that get me? Discarded. Almost erased, but not anymore. I looked at the page, the old version of my will. Now crossed out, revised, renamed. Emily's name no longer sat atop the list. The house was no longer hers to take. My assets, though modest, were no longer dangling like fruit for someone else's convenience. Instead, new names had been written in careful, deliberate ink. First, Helen, my part-time caregiver, barely 30, with soft hands and eyes that noticed everything. She once found me crying silently in the middle of folding laundry and didn't say a word. Just folded the rest beside me. Quiet company. No questions. Just kindness. When I thanked her later, she smiled and said, sometimes all we need is someone to not walk away. Then, Sister Anabel Lee, she sat with me every Thursday after prayer group, even when my faith had grown thin and frayed. She told me God wasn't just in cathedrals, but in casseroles left on porches and letters that said thinking of you when no one else remembered. When I told her what had happened, what almost happened, she took my hand and said, your worth doesn't shrink just because someone else stopped seeing it. And finally, Denise, my cousin, the one I hadn't seen in years but who called me after my fall out of nowhere, just to say she'd had a dream. I needed company. She drove 4 hours to bring me homemade soup and sat on the porch all afternoon like no time had passed. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just said, you're not alone unless you want to be. These women, these witnesses to my pain and presence, were not chosen out of rebellion. They were chosen because they stayed, Because when I needed someone to see me, they didn't look away. I took the pen in my hand and signed beside each change. Not fast, not in fear, but slow, certain, present. Mr. Dorsey looked over the pages, nodded once, then gathered them neatly. Would you like a copy for your records? Yes, I said. And one for each of them. He paused. You want them to know now? I do. I wasn't keeping this in a drawer. I wasn't waiting until after I was gone to say what needed to be said. I wanted them to know they mattered while I still had breath to say it. I don't want my legacy to be silence. I told him. He looked up, almost startled by the conviction in my voice. That's powerful. It's overdue. When I stepped out of the office, the sun was warm on my shoulders. A soft breeze lifted the hem of my cardigan. The street was alive with chatter and footsteps. But I felt still, not stagnant, just centered, for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel like someone's shadow. I felt like a woman with roots again. I walked, rolled to the corner cafe and ordered myself a slice of lemon pie. The kind with a graham cracker crust and just a hint of tartness. I sat at a corner table, pulled the papers from my purse, and reread every word, every clause, every name, not out of doubt, but reverence. This was more than paperwork. It was a declaration. I wasn't erasing Emily to be cruel. I was removing the assumption that love could only move in one direction. That sacrifice should always be silent. That a mother's value is measured only in her ability to give. No doubt, I was done leaving pieces of myself behind in the hope someone else would gather them with gratitude. From now on, I would give where I was seen. I folded the will, tucked it back into its envelope, and whispered to myself, if I'm going to leave something behind, it won't be regret. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I meant it. The letter sat in the center of my desk, cream paper, navy ink, no greeting card embellishments. Just truth, waiting to be folded. I had started and stopped this letter too many times to count. At first I tried to write in anger, listing out every offense, every wound, every moment she made me feel like something less than her mother. But rage burns fast. And what I wanted wasn't fire. It was clarity, so I began again. This time, not to hurt her, but to unburden myself. Emily, you once asked me to trust you. And I did. That's where this begins. I trusted you with my vulnerability, my hopes, my past. I gave you everything, not in grand gestures, but in 1,000 invisible sacrifices. Cold dinners so you could have warm clothes. Sleepless nights so you could dream safely. Quiet tears in the kitchen so your days stayed light. I never once asked for anything back but honesty, dignity, a sliver of the same care I offered freely instead. You brought me papers cloaked in urgency and disguised with smiles and asked me to sign away what little I had left. My house, my body, my choices. You called it protection, but it was control. And when I hesitated, not out of paranoia, but instinct, you turned cold. As if my questions were an insult. As if your discomfort outweighed my right to understand what was being taken from me. Do you know what that feels like? To be treated not as a person, but a problem. To realize the one you raise now sees you as an obstacle. You say you love me. Maybe you do. Maybe in your own way. But love without respect is manipulation. And care that strips someone of their voice isn't compassion. It's custody. I read every word of those documents. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I finally learned to trust myself. And what I found in those lines wasn't safety. It was surrender. You wanted control of my assets, my medical decisions, my autonomy, all under the guise of streamlining things. But I am not a task to be managed. I am a woman. I have earned my name, my home, my peace, so I made changes. I met with a lawyer, one who listened, not lectured. I rewrote my will, rerouted what I built with these tired hands and this quiet heart. You are no longer the inheritor of my silence. You may be angry. You may say I blindsided you, that I should have talked it through. But when you were rushing me to sign, When your husband spoke over me in my own kitchen, this letter is not revenge, it's release. I am not trying to punish you. I am trying to protect myself. Because the woman you handed those documents to, the one in the worn cardigan with a healing ankle and trembling fingers, that woman was still your mother. She still remembered your first birthday, the way you cried after scraping your knee, how you used to whisper secrets into her ear before bed. But she also remembers the moment. You stopped calling unless something was needed. The look in your eyes when you said it's just paperwork. Mom, like I was being difficult for breathing before drowning. You asked me to trust you, and I did. That's why I won't again. Not out of bitterness, but because trust once broken becomes something else. Not hate, not vengeance, just a quiet understanding of where the line now stands. I have made peace with my decisions. I hope one day you find peace with yours. Mom, I sealed the envelope slowly. There was no ceremony. Just the soft press of glue, the flattening of a fold. I didn't write urgent on the front. I didn't even write personal. I just addressed it in simple block letters to Emily. From Mother, I left it on the mantel the morning. Mr. Dorsey filed the revised documents. A week passed in silence. Then came the call. Mom. Her voice cracked like dry wood under pressure. I heard from your lawyer. She paused. Is it true? I didn't answer. Why didn't you talk to me? She asked, as if we hadn't stood in this silence for years. As if she hadn't stopped seeing me long before I stopped speaking. I did, I said finally. You just didn't hear me. You've made a mistake. You're letting people get in your head. No, Emily, I replied softly. I finally cleared it. She said my name once. Then again, like summoning an old version of me. The one who said yes before she knew the cost. The one who signed things before reading. I was just trying to help, she insisted. I know, I said. But helping me doesn't mean owning me. She was quiet. And I realized then she hadn't expected a fight. She had expected compliance, guilt, maybe even gratitude. What she got instead was a mother who found her voice too late for permission but just in time for the truth. I left you a letter. I said ... click ... the line went dead. I didn't hear from her again. I don't know if she read it. I don't know if she cried or cursed. I don't know if she showed her husband or hid it in a drawer. That part of the story is no longer mine to tell. But I do know this. I wrote what needed to be written. And sometimes, that's the only justice a mother can give herself. Not permission. Not explanation, but a line. A final, steady, unshakable line. The porch creaked beneath my chair, just like it always had. Same chipped railing. Same terracotta pots James and I bought on a spring afternoon decades ago. But something was different now. This house, once nearly signed away, stood steady because I had learned to. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in streaks of gold and rose. I rocked gently, letting the rhythm of the chair match the hush of the breeze. I was alone, but not lonely. And that was new. Inside. The kettle was still warm. The old radio hummed a jazz tune through static. On the table beside me sat the pen, the same one I used to rewrite my will. Its weight no longer scared me. I didn't see it as a symbol of power or paperwork or defense. I saw it as something far more important. Choice. The kind of choice that had been taken from too many women like me, quietly, subtly, and with smiles. Earlier that morning, I'd taken a small envelope to the local community office. Inside was a check. Not a huge sum, but enough to start something that mattered. I want to create a garden, I told them. A space for mothers. The woman at the desk blinked. Mothers. I nodded. Mothers who were forgotten, rewritten, or erased. This will be a place with benches, flowers, and shade. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere dignified. She smiled. We don't have anything like that. I know, I said. That's why I'm building it. The land was already there, an unused patch behind the library. A place people passed by without noticing. Just like so many women once they age out of usefulness. I chose it on purpose. The garden would have lavender and thyme, herbs that soothed. There'd be a sign at the entrance carved from cedar. That read, "For the women who weren't heard until they whispered no." It felt fitting. That afternoon, Grace had dropped by with fresh peaches. Claire followed, guitar in hand, her dog trailing behind. Janine called to say she'd be in town next week, wanted to bring me to the nursery to pick out perennials. They weren't family by blood, but they were mine. They listened, showed up, asked nothing but honesty in return. I once believed that peace came through forgiveness, that I had to find a way to let go of the pain to move forward. But peace, I'd learned, isn't always soft. Sometimes peace is choosing the hard road, the one that says, I remember everything and I still choose myself. That's what this porch had become, not a waiting room for apologies that might never come, but a throne for a woman who stopped asking for permission. The phone hadn't rung in days. Emily hadn't called, and I hadn't reached out either. The silence between us wasn't angry. It was final. A line had been drawn, not out of spite, but necessity. She would live her life sculpted in the comfort of justifications, and I would live mine carved from clarity. I looked out over the yard. A young woman walked by with her toddler. They paused at the edge of the fence, pointing to a bluebird on the feeder. I smiled and raised a hand. She waved back. Once I would have thought of Emily, wondered if she would ever bring her daughter by, if I'd ever braid her granddaughter's hair or read her stories at dusk. Now, I just watched the bird. Peace doesn't always come in reunions. Sometimes it comes in acceptance. I picked up the pen, held it lightly. I'd used it to erase a name from my will, then to rewrite a legacy, then to create a garden, and now I used it to jot down a note for the mailman. Nothing dramatic, just a thank you for always placing my letters carefully in the box. Rain or shine, it felt good to write without urgency, without fear, to use the tool that almost undid me as an extension of choice, not coercion. The sun dipped lower, turning the windows golden. I closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered the girl I used to be, hopeful, eager, full of stories. I remembered the young mother who gave everything, the grieving widow who lost her rhythm, the older woman in a wheelchair who was told, just sign here. And I held them all with gentleness. They had walked me here to this. Porch, to this, peace, to this ending that felt more like a beginning. When I opened my eyes, the light had softened, the world kept moving, birds fluttering, breeze shifting, neighbors calling to one another across fences. But I stayed still, not stuck, not small, just steady at the center of my own story. For once, and finally signed by me.